was the evening of Sunday the 24th of January in 1993 when Stacey Kuruppel, at 7 years old, reportedly slipped out of the property she shared with her mother and younger sister in Bracknell, Berkshire. Just 3 hours later, she was discovered in a local woodland where she'd been reportedly strangled by her own necklace. Now 30 years on, what happened to Stacey still remains a mystery. This video contains descriptions of crimes against children, and as such it may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised. Welcome to Murder in the First. My name is Gemma and this channel is dedicated to all things true crime. Now, any views or opinions that I have on any of the cases that I cover are purely that, just my opinion. My respect always goes out to the friends and family of the victims. Now make yourself a coffee or a tea, get comfortable, and with all that, let's jump right in. Today's video starts in Birch Hill, which is a suburb in the town of Bracknell. Stacey was reported missing by her mother Gillian a little after 6 p.m. Friends and neighbours started frantically searching the area straight away, and then the police were called. She was tragically found about 3 hours later, around 9 p.m, by police dog handler Ian Boswell. It was reported that Ian had said, "I thought she was asleep. I saw a small child lying on her back under some overhanging branches. I knelt down and spoke her name. I felt for a pulse, but I could not find one." Following this, an ambulance was called and they tried to revive her on the spot. Unfortunately, they had to take her to Heatherwood Hospital in Ascot. Despite the best efforts of the paramedics, Stacey was unfortunately pronounced dead, and the news of her death then started to spread through the local community. On Tuesday the 26th of January, her birth father, Steve Norton, actually went to go and view Stacey's body. Now, there's a couple of Steves within this story. Steve Norton is her birth father, and there's another Steve later on, which is Gillian's ex-boyfriend, now friend. Steve didn't really have much to do with Stacey following the split with him and Gillian, but obviously he was devastated nonetheless. He went with his sister Christine to go and view her body. That later that evening, within the newspaper, they'd announced what had likely happened that evening, and they were announcing that it was likely a tragic accident. It was reported that Stacey had walked out of her property, walked into the woodlands at South Hill Park Art Centre, and unfortunately had snagged her necklace on a low-hanging branch. She was unable to release herself, and so the necklace and jewellery had strangled her. It was revealed that the man in charge, Detective Superintendent John Bound, remained very sceptical that Stacey's death was in fact accidental. On the 29th of January, it was announced that following a second post-mortem that the police had requested, the marks around Stacey's neck actually revealed that she had been strangled. However, they'd said she wasn't manually strangled, but she was strangled with her jewellery. So what first appeared to be an accident was now classified as a murder, and the question was, who killed Stacey? Stacey, along with her 33-year-old mum Gillian and her half-sister, lived together in the two-bedroom flat back in 1993. Now, there are some sources that name the sister. However, later on in the case, it seems that she would like to remain anonymous. So throughout this, I will only refer to her as Stacey's sister or the baby. Gillian, or Jill as she was referred to, had just recently split from Steve Hartigan. This is the second Steve. Now, Steve Hartigan, although they'd split, they had actually remained friends. Steve was actually one of 4 people in the flat the night that Stacey went missing. It was said that the group was sitting around drinking tea together that evening. However, at the inquest later on, it was revealed that the group was smoking weed and not drinking tea. It was claimed that Stacey was put to bed at 5:30 that evening following an argument with her mother Jill. It was later claimed that the people in the house, the 4 people visiting, had heard shouts coming from the bedroom. At the inquest, Gillian was heard to say, "I wasn't sure if I had heard it, so I didn't go into the bedroom. I went to run a bath. I didn't get in, but I went to check the children. I bent down to kiss Stacey goodnight, but she wasn't in bed. Her big teddy was there with the covers pulled up over it." This was then around 6 p.m. when Gillian found that Stacey was missing and notified police. She had said that she didn't have any obvious reason that she thought Stacey would leave the property. She later speculated that perhaps it was to draw attention to herself. Stacey, who was around 4 foot tall with brown shoulder-length hair, had supposedly dressed herself in a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, some royal blue tracksuit bottoms, and was carrying a bag which had patterned sides. She had reportedly left the property of her own accord. What happened to Stacey in the few hours between being put to bed and her body being found still remains a mystery. On the 4th of March 1993, Detective Superintendent John Bound told the Bracknell Times newspaper that he thought that Stacey had walked over the lakeside by South Hill Park. He thought this was likely where she was killed, and then her body was taken to the place where she was found. The pathologist's findings agreed with this, and adding weight to this theory was the dog handler Ian Boswell that found Stacey. He had remarked how clean her shoes were, considering how wet and muddy the place that she was found was. Following the announcement that Stacey's death was now a murder investigation, the police assigned to the case grew to over 30. They spent their time canvassing the local community, and it was reported that after all their efforts, they had canvassed over 300 homes. Despite the increase to the officers and all of the canvassing, the case, however, was going slow. Part of the problem seems that there was very little in the way of physical evidence. Stacey's body didn't show any signs of SA, and also it showed that there was no struggle with the person that had tried to kill her. The police spokesman, Chief Inspector John Reeve, had told the press that after 4 hours of canvassing around the South Hill Park area, unfortunately nothing had come of it. Steve Norton, which was Stacey's birth father, was devastated to find out that the case was actually a murder case. He appealed to the public by saying, "Someone must have seen something. I just want them to come forward and tell the police." In another interview, he added, "It's difficult for me to explain the way I feel. I can't believe that someone has done this to her. I just want the person who did this caught." Stacey's mother Gillian was too traumatised to make a public appeal, so Steve Hartigan, her ex, became the unofficial mouthpiece for the family by saying, "I was there on the night Stacey went missing. I knew her very well. She was caring and open. For someone to attack a kid, they've got to be mad. I can't begin to comprehend their mentality. Jill and the rest of the family are devastated. Jill lived her life around those girls. She was totally devoted to them. Surely somebody must have seen something last Sunday. There must have been people around on the evening Stacey was killed." A little over a week from when Stacey was murdered, the police's efforts had uncovered a single witness that may have seen Stacey walking over the bridge at South Hill Park. It was the only sighting and could not be confirmed. This sighting represents the only one uncovered throughout the investigation. While it was dark that evening, it does seem rather unusual that nobody would have spotted a young girl walking through the woodland alone. Police obviously also found this odd, because by the 8th of February they turned their focus inwards. They had begun the process of questioning Jill and her associates to see more about Stacey's home life. On Thursday the 11th of February, Gillian was arrested. She was kept in custody for 87 hours, with police being granted 2 extensions to her questioning time. At 7 p.m. on Sunday the 14th of March, Gillian was released without charge. She went back to the secret location that she was staying with friends. Chief Inspector Reeves spoke of the release, saying, "We never had all our eggs in one basket, and we're carrying on with the inquiry. We have no new leads, and we'll be speaking to more people and making more appeals." On Tuesday the 16th of February, Gillian released a statement through Steve Hartigan which said, "She wants to make it clear that police were excellent in the way that they handled everything during her arrest. She does not blame the police for their actions and is not bitter, but is concerned that Stacey's killer is caught. We did find it unusual, but Jill was arrested for general questioning. Jill's close friends are being very supportive, considering she is coping very well. But she is very dazed. She does not care about the rumours that people are saying about her. She just wants to have the killer caught." Focusing again on the area where Stacey was last seen, police appealed for 2 walkers and a man with a guitar, although these men came forward and were quickly ruled out, despite the fact that the police were freely admitting that it looked as though she was killed by somebody she knew. The police spoke to night shift workers at the Hilton Hotel and Sainsbury's, which was near where Stacey was murdered, but nothing seemed to come of these inquiries. While all of the news stories talk of the lack of evidence and the lack of witnesses, there did seem to be something that was quietly happening below the radar. It's no surprise to hear then by May that the police had submitted a file on one single suspect to the Crown Prosecution Service. The public, it seemed, however, had drawn their own conclusions. Jill's family, Steve claimed, had actually turned against her. Steve, who spoke to the Bracknell Times, had told them that him and Jill had gone to the place where Stacey's body was found, laid flowers on her birthday at 2 a.m. They stood quietly in a vigil. This was the only time that they could get any peace. While police waited on CPS's guidance, Stacey's family was still unable to bury her. June the 22nd, 1993, news had actually broken that despite the police submitting their file to CPS had actually decided that there was not enough evidence to bring charges against the person within the file. An unnamed official source had told the papers that the police felt like CPS were acting as judge and jury and they were not right in this decision. When asked about this, a spokesman from the prosecution service was heard saying, "The reason is straightforward on the evidence currently available. There was no realistic prospect of conviction." Following this, the detectives involved in the murder inquiry were told to stay silent. Aggravated Detective Superintendent John Bound was barred from holding a press conference, instead being forced to announce that even though the case was open, the officers on the case would be scaled back. For Stacey's family, the news of this was really hard to handle. Her birth father, Steve Norton, was heard saying, "I had been hoping that my daughter's murderer would be standing in the dock. I am angry and bitter, but not towards the police. I just can't understand the CPS saying that this shouldn't go to court. I think the evidence that police have should be put before a jury. I want a life for a life." The one positive to come out of all of this was the family was now able to plan Stacey's funeral. On the 2nd of July 1993, Stacey was laid to rest at East Hampstead Cemetery. As the service drew to an end, Stacey's body, which lay in a white coffin, was lowered into the ground. Steve Norton stood at a distance and watched. Reportedly, he said that Gillian had told him he was not able to tend while she was mourning. After Gillian had left, he finally came to the graveside of his daughter. He saw a lot of wreaths lying there, including the one he had bought, which had said, "To the one that was so pure, you will always be locked in our hearts for now and evermore. Rest in peace, Stacey. Love, Dad." With the funeral finally over and the investigation becoming a cold case, Gillian was keen to live a quiet life as she attempted to come to terms with what had happened to her daughter. As I said before, the community had clearly decided who had killed Stacey. Gillian had been moved to a new location with Steve Hartigan, but when neighbours and people had found out she had moved, she was then subject to a string of attacks. Her tyres were slashed and she was getting threats. But on the 20th of August, there was an arson attack on her home. Then an announcement was made that there was a strong possibility that at the delayed inquest, evidence would be publicly heard which pointed to the suspected killer. It was then in June 1994 that the inquest opened in the Guildhall in Windsor. While statements taken by the police were heard in court, there was no witnesses called. Furious at this decision, Steve Norton, Stacey's father, was heard to say, "From the word go, this hasn't gone right. It has just been one long nightmare. The coroner is the only one who can go to the Home Office over the heads of CPS. But for him to take everything from statements is just sweeping it under the carpet. I have waited all this time, but I've not had one bit of luck on my side." On the police's part, it echoed their earlier statements, saying that there was no witnesses to be called because there was nothing to be gained from having a murder investigation in a coroner's court. It was heard, however, at the inquest that Gillian, who had since this had her daughters taken into care, had struggled to cope with Stacey and her little sister. Barry Quirrell, who was her ex-husband, had made a series of damning accusations. He had said, "She would tell me that she knocked Stacey across the room or picked her up and gave her a good shaking. Stacey was not really bad, but it was like a game to her to see how far she could get to Gillian before Gillian would slap her. She told me lots of times that she had given Stacey a good shaking, and that on one occasion she took hold of Stacey by the neck and shook her until she went blue. She would just scream at Jill, and the baby would start screaming too." He went on to say, "I saw her pick up the younger daughter by the back of the dungarees and throw her in the cot very hard." Also heard at the inquest was a statement by Denise, Gillian's sister. She claimed that she had asked Gillian who could have killed Stacey, to which Gillian replied, "I could have done it," and laughed. This is a really bizarre thing to say to your sister or anyone else after the death of your child. I can't even imagine what was going through Gillian's head when she said this. As well as witness statements, the police had submitted soil samples. They claimed these samples actually linked Gillian to the place where Stacey was found. The coroner, Robert Wilson, though, was keen to stress that to him, the samples seemed inconclusive. The verdict when it arrived was found to be unlawful killing. Steve Norton, Stacey's biological father, who was initially quick to defend Gillian, had actually said, "It was now clear who had killed my daughter. The facts, he said, speak for themselves. In 2018, one of Stacey's siblings had appealed under strict anonymity and asked for her case to be reopened. A spokesman for Thames Valley Police actually said that they had no plans to reopen the case. However, in 2023, the case would be reopened. The head of Thames Valley's major crime investigation team said, "Today marks 30 years since the brutal murder of 7-year-old Stacey Kurapel in Bracknell. I believe there are people who have information or are suspicious about Stacey's murder, but for whatever reason have not yet informed the police. The time has come to provide that information." All we can hope is that with this investigation reopening, someone will come forward with some information which leads to a prosecution and gives justice for Stacey. Thanks for watching today, guys. If you did like what you saw, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.